I'm 67 years old, and I've learned something very simple. When people move into your house without asking, they're not asking for help. They're measuring how much they can take. That Tuesday, my daughter-in-law brought her parents their furniture and their entitlement through my front door. She called it family. I called it the moment she forgot whose name was on the deed. I'm 67 years old, and if I've lived long enough to know one thing, it's this: when someone drops suitcases in your hallway without asking, they rarely mean just for a few days. When Sarah's parents moved into my house that Tuesday, nobody asked for my permission. So I decided I wasn't going to ask for anyone's permission anymore either. Not ever again. My name is Martha. I'm 67, and I value two things above all else: peace and order. Since my husband passed away, I've lived in our home in a quiet suburb outside of Philadelphia. It's no mansion, but it's paid off. My son Lucas and his wife Sarah live in the finished upstairs suite. It was a practical decision they save on rent, and I'm not alone. But practical is a word Sarah defines very differently than I do. That Tuesday afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find a strange moving van in my driveway. Men were hauling heavy leather armchairs through my front door. In the foyer, Sarah stood barking orders with an energy she usually only reserved for complaining. "Take that straight into the living room. We cleared out plenty of space," she shouted. I set my grocery bags down and just stared at her. My living room already had 3 massive suitcases sitting in the middle of the floor. "Martha, there you are," Sarah said without a hint of guilt. "My parents are having some major issues with their apartment. They're moving in here for a while. There's plenty of room and, hey, we're family, right?" I didn't ask how long they planned to stay. I just watched as Sarah's mother started shoving my porcelain figurines aside to make room for her own framed photos. Lucas stood in the corner, staring at his shoes. He didn't say a word. Sarah had already made the call. The bags were unpacked. In that moment, I didn't feel rage. I felt a deep, cold clarity. They thought this house was a public space they could manage as they pleased. Sarah gave me a pitying smile, as if I were a guest in my own hallway. "You don't have to change a thing, Martha. We've got this handled." I just gave a short nod and went into the kitchen. If the rules of the house weren't going to be respected anymore, then I would just have to change the structure of the house itself. My first step wasn't a fight. It was a simple trip to the circuit breaker in the basement, just to check a few things. It was time to take control of the resources. I wondered what they'd have to say at dinner. Dinner was a total power play. Sarah had cooked in my kitchen with my pots without asking. Her father, a man with a booming, obnoxious voice named Bill, was sitting in my late husband's chair at the head of the table. "You've got a nice place here, Lucas," Bill said, clapping my son on the shoulder. Sarah corrected him immediately with a sharp smile. "It's our house, Dad. Martha lives here with us, of course." I sat there quietly eating my soup. Lucas avoided eye contact entirely. He knew that wasn't legally true, but he was too weak to push back against Sarah. Then she laid out the new plan. Since her parents were on the ground floor now, so they wouldn't have to deal with stairs, I was supposed to move into the small guest room in the attic. "It'll be cozier for you, Martha, and we really need the space down here for my mom's new home office." They talked about me like I was a piece of furniture that could be rearranged. I set my spoon down. "The attic isn't insulated," I said calmly. "It gets freezing in the winter." Sarah waved it off. "Oh, we'll get you a space heater. You'll be fine." I didn't argue. I knew words didn't work on Sarah. Instead, I stood up and grabbed my ledger. Right in front of them, I started jotting down the monthly costs for electricity, water, and heating. Now that we have 5 adults in the house, The utility bills are going to jump by exactly 150%, I said matter-of-factly. Bill laughed. Come on, Martha, don't be so stingy. We're family. Sarah chimed in. We already pay you that flat monthly fee for utilities anyway. That was true, but that fee was based on 2 people. I did the math in my head. My name was the only one on the deed, and all the utility accounts were in my name. I had never given them power of attorney. That night, I didn't sleep in the attic. I stayed in my bedroom, and for the first time in years, I locked the door from the inside. Tomorrow, I would make the first real change. The only question was how long it would take them to notice. The next morning, I began my silent strike. Usually, I'd have breakfast ready for everyone, sort the mail, and do Lucas and Sarah's laundry with mine. That ended today. I brewed exactly 1 cup of coffee and toasted 1 bagel for myself. When Sarah and her parents came down and saw the empty table, her eyebrows shot up. No breakfast for us, she asked. I figured since you're taking over the household management, you'd want to develop your own routines. I replied pleasantly. Bill grumbled something about hospitality, while Sarah's mother Linda started rummaging through my cabinets for jam. Where's the good preserves? She called out. I didn't answer. I was already busy moving my most valuable heirlooms and personal documents into my private quarters. I installed a simple but sturdy lock on my kitchen drawer and my pantry. Property rights are a clear thing in this country, and I began to enforce that clarity physically. That afternoon, Lucas came to me. Mom, Sarah's pissed. She says you're being childish and her parents don't feel welcome. I looked my son in the eye. Lucas, who pays the property taxes on this house. He stammered. Well, you do, but I cut him off. Who paid $15,000 for the new sunroom last year? He lowered his head. You did. I put a hand on his shoulder. I'm not mad at you, but I am not your in-law's maid. If they want to live here, they live by my rules. Later, when I saw Linda trying to cram a massive load of towels into my washing machine, I went down to the basement. I had already secured the machine's power cord with a small plug lockout, a cheap device from Home Depot. Sarah came storming down the stairs. What is this, Martha? We need to do laundry. I looked at her. The machine is old. 5 people will burn out the motor. You'll need to use the laundromat down the street or buy your own machine for upstairs. Sarah didn't scream, but her face turned beet red. For the first time, it clicked for her. I wasn't planning on playing along. But that was just the beginning of the restructuring. 2 weeks went by. Sarah and her parents mostly ignored me, treating me like a ghost. They had taken over the living room, replaced my rugs with theirs, and cluttered my backyard with ugly plastic lawn chairs. Sarah felt so emboldened that she announced a housewarming party. We're inviting all our friends and the neighbors to celebrate our new life, she told Lucas proudly at dinner. She didn't even ask if the date worked for me. I watched them send out the invites. The cards read, "The Miller family invites you to their new home." My last name, which was also Lucas's, was being used to make it sound like Sarah and Lucas were the sole owners. On the day of the party, the house was a disaster zone. Food prep was everywhere. Bill had started setting up a massive charcoal grill in the garden, directly on top of my prize-winning roses. I went out to him. Bill, that grill needs to move away from the flowers. He just laughed and lit the coals. Relax, Martha. A little smoke won't hurt him. We're celebrating today. Sarah came out with champagne flutes. She looked at me and said, "Could you maybe stay upstairs tonight or go for a walk? We have a lot of guests coming and the living room is going to be pretty tight." It wasn't a request. It was an eviction notice from my own living room. I didn't say a word. I went to my room and pulled out my paperwork. I had spent the last few days making phone calls, but not to lawyers. I had talked to the electric and water companies. Since I was the sole account holder, I had the right to adjust my service plan. I had opted into a load shedding program and a tiered usage alert system. While the first guests were arriving downstairs and Sarah was proudly showing off her house, I sat quietly by my window. I waited for the moment the strain on the house and my patience hit its breaking point. The party was in full swing when the first problem occurred. By 8 p.m., the house was packed. Sarah's friends were drinking my wine that they'd raided from the cellar, and the music was thumping through the floorboards. I heard Sarah laughing in the hallway. Yeah, we had to do a lot of renovating. Martha's taste was a bit dated, but it's basically ours now. That was the signal. I went to the basement and flipped the main breaker for the entire house except for my bedroom and the kitchen fridge, which I'd had an electrician wire to a separate sub-panel days before. Suddenly, the house went pitch black and the music died. A collective groan went through the crowd. I heard Lucas shout, "Did a fuse blow? I'll check it." He came into the basement where I was waiting with a flashlight. "Mom, what happened?" "The system is overloaded, Lucas. Too many appliances, too many people. This house isn't wired for a 5-person household, plus a rager." Lucas tried to flip the switch back up, but it wouldn't budge. I had physically blocked the breaker with a safety lockout. Upstairs, panic set in. Without light or music, the vibe died instantly. Sarah came screaming down the stairs. "Martha, turn the lights on. We have guests." I stepped out of the shadows. "I can't, Sarah. The wiring is old. If we force it, we risk an electrical fire. Since I'm the owner, I'm liable for the damages. I'm not taking that risk." Sarah's face, caught in the beam of my flashlight, was a mask of pure rage. "You're doing this on purpose." "I'm just protecting my property," I said calmly. The guests were already starting to file out. Without power, there was no cold beer, no music, and no atmosphere. Bill tried to shove past me to get to the box himself. I held up a document. "This is the current electrical inspection report. Any unauthorized tampering voids the insurance. You want to sign for that liability, Bill?" He hesitated. He was a loudmouth, but he wasn't a fool. He knew he was on thin legal ice. The party was over before the buffet was even served. But I was just getting started with the renovations. The next morning, the mood in the house felt like a funeral. Sarah wouldn't speak to me. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, looking miserable, staring into a cold cup of coffee. I sat down across from him. "Lucas, we need to talk. Not about the party, but about the future." He nodded weakly. I laid a letter on the table. It was a formal notice to vacate the upstairs unit, terminating the verbal rental agreement we had made years ago. "I want you and Sarah's parents to find a new place within the next 90 days, I said, without a drop of bitterness. Lucas's eyes went wide. "Mom, you can't do that. We don't have the money for 2 separate apartments." "That isn't my problem, Lucas. You moved 2 extra people in without asking. You damaged my property and treated me like a stranger in my own home." Sarah walked in and saw the letter. She let out a scoffing laugh. "You can't just kick us out." "We live here." "You do," I said. "But as of tomorrow, I'm having sub-meters installed for the upstairs unit. I already have the appointment. Since you don't have your own accounts, I will be throttling the utilities to the upstairs to the legal minimum." Sarah turned pale. She knew I had the savings and the sheer willpower to see it through. I also informed them that I had rented out the garage, which Bill had commandeered for his car, to a neighbor starting Monday. The contract was signed. Bill needs to park on the street, I said. The neighbor is paying $200 a month, and I need that money to fix the damage you did to the living room walls. Sarah started to yell, but her father walked in. He saw the letter and my face. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. He realized the sweet old Martha they thought they could steamroll was gone. Now they had to choose fight or fold. The following days were a war of nerves. Sarah tried to intimidate me by loudly trashing my cold heart to her parents while I was in the room. I didn't react. I bought a pair of noise-canceling headphones and listened to Vivaldi while I worked in the garden. My garden was my territory again. I had personally hauled those ugly plastic chairs to the curb with a free sign. Bill was livid, but since he didn't have a receipt, there wasn't a thing he could do. The biggest change was the kitchen. I put a small fridge in my bedroom and put a heavy-duty lock on the big one in the kitchen. Everyone provides for themselves, I told Lucas. It was hard seeing my son suffer, but he needed to learn to stand up for himself. He was 35 years old. It was time to grow a backbone. Linda tried to play the martyr, complaining about her back hurting because she was sleeping poorly because of me. I handed her a business card for a good physical therapist in the next town over. One night, I heard a massive blow-up upstairs. Bill and Sarah were screaming at each other. It was about money. Without me subsidizing their groceries and bills, things were getting tight. Bill had already broken his lease in the city, and his security deposit had been blown on the party and new furniture. They were trapped in a house that wasn't theirs with an owner who had cut off the cash flow. I sat on my porch and enjoyed the evening air. I had started calling old friends I'd neglected because of Sarah's drama. One friend, a retired banker, gave me a great tip about the tax implications of having long-term guests. There were ways to turn up the heat without ever stepping into a courtroom. I was just waiting for Sarah's next big mistake. She made it sooner than I expected. Sarah actually thought she could go around me. One afternoon, I came home to find a man in a suit walking through my backyard taking photos. Lucas was standing there looking incredibly uncomfortable. "What's going on here?" I asked. The man introduced himself as a real estate agent. "Mrs. Miller asked me to do a valuation on the property." "You're planning on selling to upgrade to something larger, right?" I looked at Lucas, then at Sarah, as she stepped out the back door. She actually believed she could list my house maybe with a forged signature or by badgering Lucas into claiming a share he didn't have. "This house is not for sale," I told the agent, "and this woman has absolutely no authority over this property. Here is my ID and a copy of the deed." The agent's professional demeanor turned ice cold immediately. He looked at Sarah, packed his folder, and walked away without another word. He didn't want any part of a fraudulent listing. Sarah went nuclear. "You're ruining our future. We could all move into a mansion where we aren't constantly on top of each other." "You mean where you'd have more control?" I countered. "Sarah, you tried to sell my home behind my back. That crosses every line a family has." I turned to Lucas. "Lucas, if you knew about this and didn't tell me, you're just as responsible as she is." Lucas shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I didn't want this, Mom. She said it would be better for everyone." In that moment, I realized I had to save Lucas by kicking him out. He would never develop a spine as long as he was under Sarah's thumb. I went inside and picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. I called the locksmith. It was time for the final phase. If they thought they could sell my life, they were about to find out they didn't even have access to it. 2 days later, on a Friday morning, I called a family meeting in the living room. Bill, Linda, Sarah, and Lucas sat there looking jittery. I brought all my folders. "As of this morning, I've had the locks changed on the front door and all the side entries," I began. Sarah jumped up. "You can't do that. We live here." "You still have your keys," I said calmly. "But they don't work anymore. Here are 4 new keys. One for Lucas, one for Sarah. Your parents don't get one." Linda started crying. Bill turned purple. "This is illegal lockout," he bellowed. "No," I said firmly. "It's home security. Lucas and Sarah have a right to the upstairs unit until the 90-day notice is up. I respect that. But your parents have no lease and no permission to be here permanently. They are guests who overstayed their welcome. They have until tonight to pack their bags." I slid an envelope across the table. Inside is the address of a Marriott in the next town. I've paid for the first 3 nights for Bill and Linda. That is my final act of family kindness. Sarah looked like she wanted to lunge at me, but Lucas held her back. He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw respect in his eyes. He realized I wasn't the weak widow who could be pushed around. Bill realized he'd lost. He was a man who understood power, and mine was now absolute. He stood up, signaled to Linda, and they started packing. Sarah screamed and cursed, but she was powerless. Without her parents' backup, and with a husband who finally realized who the actual boss was, her influence evaporated. I watched them leave from the kitchen window. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. The house finally felt like it could breathe again, but there was one more thing to do to restore the order. It's been a month since Sarah's parents moved out. Lucas and Sarah are still upstairs, but the dynamic has completely shifted. They now pay fair market rent, which goes via autopay directly into my savings account. We have strict rules. The ground floor is my private zone. The kitchen is on a schedule, and guests require 24-hour notice. Sarah has gotten very quiet. She knows that at the first sign of trouble, I'll file for a formal eviction, and this time I'll go through with it. Last night, Lucas knocked on my door. He was alone. We sat on the porch and shared a glass of wine just like we used to. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. "I think I lost myself in my marriage. You taking a stand showed me that you have to set boundaries, or you'll lose who you are." I smiled. That was the real win, not keeping the house, but finding my son again. I've repainted the living room. The marks from the party are gone. My porcelain is back where it belongs, and the garden is slowly recovering. The roses are starting to bud again. Bill and Linda are in a small apartment on the other side of the town. We don't talk, and that's fine. Sometimes silence is the most honest form of communication. This morning, I woke up early and watched the sunrise. The house was quiet. No strange voices, no fighting over the bill, no disrespect. I'm Martha. I'm 67, and I don't just own a house. I own my life again. They say a man's home is his castle, but I've learned that a castle is only worth something if you have the courage to defend it from those who try to steal the crown. I took a deep breath. It's a good day. I headed out to the garden. There's a lot of work to do, and this time, I'm the one setting the pace.